The Echoes of Erasure by Martha M.C. Jenkins. 1. Introduction. The Cartographer of Shadows. The perpetual twilight of Blackwood Manor Library clung to Myra Vance like a second skin. Dust motes, disturbed by her quiet movements, danced in the anemic light filtering through grime-streaked Gothic windows, appearing less like particles of grit and more like restless spirits, forever caught in the inertia of the past. The crumbling edifice sagged and groaned under the weight of its own history, a living mausoleum where time itself seemed to have forgotten to move on. Myra moved with a quiet reverence among the towering shelves, her fingers, stained with ink and age, tracing the spines of decaying ledgers. Her days were a meticulous liturgy, cataloguing, indexing, cross-referencing the names of those expunged from recorded history. These were the souls erased, the inconvenient truths, the lives deemed unworthy of remembrance. Their stories fragmented and ghost-like, whispered from unbound pages, from brittle parchment, from the very air of the library. Myra, with her spectacles perched on her nose and her dark hair perpetually escaping its braid, was their cartographer of shadows, mapping the forgotten territories of human existence. For a long time, this task had been a grim solace. A former medium, Myra had deliberately suppressed her abilities after an incident years ago, a raw, traumatic memory that still clawed at the edges of her consciousness. The silence of the dead, once a deafening roar, was now a muted hum, a background noise that she preferred to ignore. Here, in the quiet solitude of Blackwood, she could pretend to be just an archivist, a scholar, a woman whose world was bounded by paper and ink, not by the aching voices of the departed. But even through her self-imposed veil, she felt them, the cold seep of their losses, the faint shimmer of their unlived futures. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible communion. And watching her always, from the periphery of her vision, from the depths of the shadows cast by monumental bookcases, was Silas Blackwood. He was the library's spectral guardian, a mournful figure bound to its shelves, his form a translucent swirl of gray and starlight. His eyes, ancient and sorrowful, followed her, understanding the profound, almost sacred nature of her work. Myra knew, deep in her bones, that she wasn't just cataloging. She was engaged in an act of quiet defiance against absolute oblivion, a solemn honoring of the forgotten. Each entry was a small victory, a flickering candle against the encroaching darkness of non-existence. She gathered their names, their faint echoes, and in doing so, she held back the tide of absolute silence. 2. Inciting incident. A name from the grave. The scent of damp earth and old paper was a familiar comfort on a particularly dreary autumn evening. Rain lashed against the leaded windows of Blackwood Manor, each drop a percussive beat against the melancholic score of the library. Myra, lost in the rhythm of her task, was sifting through a stack of brittle, unindexed papers, local police reports, faded newspaper clippings, and hastily scribbled personal notes detailing disappearances from a century past. Her fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance with decay, paused. A tremor, not of cold, but of profound recognition, jolted through her. It was a name, scrawled in a faded, looping hand, nestled amongst the other tragic entries. Iris Vance. The world tilted. The rain-streaked window dissolved into a blurred tableau. Myra's breath hitched, caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs. Iris, her sister. The name, precise and unmistakable, was a shard of ice in the quiet warmth of the library. Iris, who had vanished suddenly from their lives decades ago. her absence a gaping, unhealing wound that Myra had tried to cauterize with work and silence. Myra had been just a girl, told only that Iris had run away, leaving no trace, no explanation, no goodbye. The family had swallowed the fabrication, mourned in private whispers, and then, slowly, ceased to mourn at all, as if Iris's very memory was too painful to bear. But here, in this archive dedicated to the damned, the overlooked, the discarded, Iris's name was listed among those deemed unfit for remembrance. The phrasing was a gut punch. Unfit for remembrance? The world had forgotten Iris, yes, but the library remembered, albeit in a chilling context that twisted the knife in Myra's heart. The familiar hum of suppressed mediumistic senses, long dormant, roared to life within her. It was a furious, cold energy, a sensation she hadn't felt since that night, the night that had driven her into the arms of Blackwood Manor and the cold comfort of anonymity. But this was different. This wasn't the distant sorrow of strangers. This was Iris, her sister, and she wasn't just lost. She had been erased. The silence she had cultivated for so long shattered, replaced by a desperate, burning need for truth. The cartographer of shadows was now a seeker, her meticulous order thrown into devastating disarray by a single familiar name. 3. Rising Action. The Architect of Oblivion. The discovery of Iris's name ripped through Myra's carefully constructed world, exposing the raw nerve of her long-buried grief. The quiet, academic pursuit of the forgotten now burned with a personal, searing intensity. She needed answers, and the only other consciousness residing within Blackwood Manor was its spectral guardian. "Silas," Myra whispered, her voice hoarse, the name a plea rather than a command. Silas, usually a mournful, passive observer, materialized with a distinct shift in the air, a colder draft that rustled the unbound pages on her desk. His translucent figure shimmered near a towering bookcase, his ancient sorrow deepened by the unspoken truth between them. Myra didn't mince words. Iris Vance, my sister. Why is she here? What does unfit for remembrance truly mean? Silas's spectral form flickered, a silent agony rippling through him. He couldn't speak in tones the living understood, but through fragments of his spectral memory, through the library's own sentient whispers that now vibrated with a dark, chilling resonance, Myra began to piece together a terrible mosaic. The library wasn't merely a repository, it was a sophisticated, malevolent instrument. The architect of this oblivion was Mr. Abernathy, the library's deceased benefactor. The whispers painted him as a man of immense power, obsessed with curating history, not merely documenting it, but sculpting it. Abernathy had been a force of chilling control, a puppet master of narratives, excising those he deemed undesirable or inconvenient. He didn't just forget, he actively unmade. The horror of it settled over Myra like a shroud. Iris had been one such victim. Her life, her very existence, had been surgically removed to cover a scandal, a dark secret Abernathy wished to bury. The library, in its vastness and age, held the suppressed truths, but Abernathy's lingering influence, a malevolent presence woven into the very fabric of the building, actively maintained the memory suppression of the forgotten. He kept their whispers muted, their stories untold, ensuring their oblivion remained undisturbed. It was a monstrous act of temporal censorship, and Myra's sister had been caught in its terrifying net. A cold rage, unlike anything she'd ever known, ignited within Myra. Her quiet honoring of the forgotten souls now transformed into a full-blown rebellion. Abernathy had not only taken Iris, he had tried to erase her very essence. Myra would not allow it. 4. Escalation. Unleashing the unquiet dead. Silas's warnings were dire, his ethereal form growing more agitated with each of Myra's determined steps. He ghosted between her and the ancient ledgers, projecting faint images of potential chaos, of lives disrupted, of delicate historical threads unraveling. But Myra, fueled by the injustice done to Iris, ignored him. The past had to be rewritten, not just for her sister, but for all the forgotten. Her plan was both audacious and terrifying. Unleash the unquiet dead. Each haunting would be a targeted strike, a ripple effect designed to restore memory, beginning with Iris, and then, by extension, the truth of countless others. Myra found her first target in a dusty ledger, the entry for a seamstress named Eleanor Finch, unjustly accused of theft a century ago. Eleanor's story, though brief, resonated with the quiet despair of wrongful conviction. Myra focused, drawing on her reawakened mediumistic senses. The air in the library grew heavy, charged. She channeled the collective anguish of Eleanor, the raw, burning indignation of a life unjustly tarnished. Myra closed her eyes, visualizing. The ripple was small, a delicate tremor across time. Hundreds of miles away, Eleanor's great-granddaughter, a bustling genealogist named Clara, awoke from a profound, unsettling dream. In it, a spectral hand had pointed to an old, tarnished locket on her grandmother's dresser. Driven by an inexplicable urge, Clara found the locket and, hidden within its dusty compartment, a tiny, folded piece of paper, Eleanor's hidden diary. Its faded script detailed a harrowing ordeal, revealing the true culprit and exonerating the long-dead seamstress. Within days, Clara, spurred by the diary's revelations, initiated a posthumous petition, and the local historical society began correcting the public record. The ripple worked. Emboldened, Myra plunged deeper into Iris's erasure. She spent days, fueled by stale coffee and a burning need, combing through Abernathy's cryptic notes, deciphering faded marginalia, pushing Silas to reveal more. Fragmented memories of her sister's life began to surface like shimmering mirages in the desert of oblivion. Iris wasn't just a runaway, she was a brilliant, suppressed genius. Her intellect a threat to Abernathy's conservative circle. She was a passionate activist, challenging his burgeoning industrial empire, exposing its dark underbelly. Myra saw flashes of Iris's sharp wit, her fierce loyalty, her vibrant laughter. Each revelation, each snippet of her sister's true essence fueled Myra's rage and hardened her resolve. Iris hadn't merely been inconvenient, she had been a rival, a truth-teller, a formidable threat to Abernathy's carefully constructed power. But Abernathy, even in death, was not easily outmaneuvered. As Myra's efforts intensified, the library itself began to groan and shift. Abernathy's malevolent presence retaliated, subtle at first, then escalating. Bookshelves seemed to expand and contract, swallowing volumes and then spitting them out in disarray. Crucial texts Myra needed for research would vanish from her grasp, only to reappear on a different floor. Pages would scatter from ledgers, forming swirling cyclones of paper that defied gravity. A frigid draft would sweep through the library, extinguishing her lantern, plunging her into inky darkness. Poltergeist activity, once a rarity, became a constant, unnerving presence. A book crashing to the floor, a chair scraping across the wood, a distant, mocking whisper that was Abernathy's spectral laugh. Myra, though physically and emotionally drained, braced herself. The battle had begun, and Abernathy was fighting back. 5. Climax. The reckoning of remembrance. The air in Blackwood Manor Library thrummed with a preternatural tension, thick with the clash of wills, the forgotten versus the forgetter. Myra, guided by Silas's now more urgent, desperate projections and the library's own groaning discomfort, finally traced Iris's complete story to Abernathy's private, sealed study. It was a space within the library that Myra had always sensed radiated a peculiar, oppressive malevolence, its door perpetually locked, its windows shuttered, a nexus of Abernathy's power. With a surge of newfound strength, Myra blasted open the door. The study was a suffocating void, not truly dark, but utterly devoid of light and truth. And there, filling the space, a colossal, oppressive shadow solidified. It was Abernathy, not as a whisper or a draft, but as a tangible, terrifying presence. A guardian of his curated oblivion, a monstrous entity actively feeding on the forgetting of the souls he had erased. His eyes, twin pinpricks of icy malice, fixed on Myra. Waves of despair and amnesia radiated from him, threatening to crush her, to make her forget not just Iris, but herself. But Myra was no longer the frightened girl who had suppressed her gifts. She stood her ground, her reawakened mediumistic abilities blazing. She reached out, not just with her spirit, but with every fiber of her being, summoning the forgotten. From every corner of the library, from every silenced page, they rose. A swirling vortex of spectral faces and echoing voices, a chorus of indignant pleas, a storm of centuries of injustice. They were a spectral army, shimmering and potent, coalescing behind Myra, their collective fury a tangible force. "You will not erase her," Myra cried, her voice ringing with power, amplified by the clamor of the forgotten. She projected Iris's vibrant memories, not as a fragile whisper, but as a blinding supernova of truth. Iris's brilliant mind, her passionate activism, her infectious laughter, her defiant spirit. Myra wove it all together, not just into Abernathy, but into the very essence of the library itself. It was a psychic battle for historical truth, a war for the very fabric of reality. Abernathy roared, a soundless, terrifying shriek of pure outrage. He lashed out, attempting to drown Myra in waves of amnesia, to shatter her mind with existential despair. But Myra, empowered by Iris's memory and the collective fury of the forgotten, stood firm. She forced the narrative of Iris's true life into the world, an unstoppable torrent of light and sound. The air crackled, the bookshelves groaned, the very foundations of Blackwood Manor vibrated under the strain of reality being ripped and rewoven. Myra felt Abernathy's malevolent grip weakening, tearing at the edges. Then a surge of ethereal energy, surprisingly potent, flared from Silas Blackwood. For centuries, he had been a silent observer, bound by Abernathy's influence, his will lost in the echoes of his own past. But witnessing Myra's defiant stand, seeing the potential for true memory restored, something within him ignited. With a profound, almost audible crackle, Silas severed the ethereal ties binding Abernathy to the library, ancient, invisible tendrils that had anchored the malevolent spirit to his domain. The act weakened Abernathy's spectral presence, causing his colossal shadow to writhe, diminishing under the combined assault. The balance tipped. The truth, fueled by love and righteous fury, began its unstoppable victory. 6. Falling action. The mending of memory. The oppressive influence of Abernathy shattered like ancient glass. His colossal shadow, once an all-consuming void, fractured, dissipating into the library's darkest corners, shrinking until it was nothing more than a faint, lingering chill. The library itself seemed to exhale, a deep, collective sigh of relief. Its perpetual gloom, a centuries-old shroud, lifted slightly, replaced by a softer, more inviting quality of light filtering through the stained glass windows. The whispers of the forgotten no longer felt like laments in the shadows. They swelled, clearer, stronger, no longer just sighs of sorrow, but declarations of presence, echoes of lives reclaimed. Myra, utterly spent, but profoundly, achingly present, felt a profound connection to Iris. It wasn't just the memory restored. It was a spiritual embrace, a sensation of warm light against her soul. It was a goodbye, for Iris, her story now heard, could move on, but also a promise. The truth would endure. The ripples Abernathy fought so desperately to suppress began to manifest in the wider world, subtle yet undeniable. It wasn't a thunderclap, not an immediate dramatic revelation, but a slow, quiet mending of memory. Academics, poring over unrelated texts, would suddenly discover previously overlooked footnotes mentioning a brilliant female philosopher from the turn of the century whose work paralleled or even predated established theories. Old journals, long thought lost or insignificant, would mysteriously resurface in forgotten boxes and attics, revealing snippets of a vibrant activist life. The public memory of Iris Vance, once erased, began to reform, ambiguously at first, as if the collective consciousness was slowly reknitting a forgotten thread. A painting, previously attributed to a male contemporary, was now subtly reevaluated, its unique brushstrokes and perspective suggesting a different, more nuanced hand. Myra, though exhausted, felt a quiet resolve hardening within her. The fight was far from over, but the first battle had been won. The silence had been broken. 7. Resolution. The archivist of truth. Blackwood Manor Library, though still ancient and Gothic, was transformed. No longer a tomb for the erased, a prison for silenced stories, it became a sanctuary of truth, a living archive where the past was not just catalogued, but actively nurtured. The perpetual twilight had receded, replaced by a softer, more tangible light that imbued the towering shelves and dusty tomes with a quiet warmth. Myra, no longer Myra the archivist, but Myra the fully realized medium, continued her work with renewed purpose and an unshakable resolve. She documented the newly remembered, their stories now imbued with a vibrant energy that hummed from the pages. She helped the forgotten find their peace, their whispers now clear and distinct, by ensuring their stories were not just remembered, but fully restored to their rightful place in the grand tapestry of history. She had become a bridge, a vital conduit between the living and the unjustly forgotten, ensuring that no soul would suffer the indignity of oblivion again. Silas Blackwood, his own ancient sorrow eased, his spectral form radiating a gentle luminescence, became her quiet, eternal companion. No longer a guardian of silence, he was now a vigilant keeper of memory, his presence a comforting presence in the quiet halls. He had found his own resolve, his own purpose, tethered not to the pain of the past, but to the promise of remembrance. The library now held a tangible light, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the love that refused to let any soul remain truly lost. Myra understood that the fight against erasure was ongoing, a perpetual battle against indifference and the deliberate suppression of truth. But she was ready to be its eternal champion. Every name resurrected, every story reclaimed was a victory. And as she gazed out at the newly illuminated shelves, She knew with fierce certainty that no sister, no soul would ever truly be forgotten again, not while she drew breath and not while the echoes of erasure could still be heard.